The bright June sunshine of 2012 began with an unusual commotion in Prescott Valley, Arizona. 4 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a small wooden house at the end of a deserted road, where rows of cacti cast shadows on the sandy ground. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, watching officers in bulletproof vests move around the property, one holding an arrest warrant, another signaling with a walkie-talkie. Inside, Richard Kane, 68 years old, was preparing his morning coffee, a habit he had maintained for 3 decades, since the day his daughter Lydia Kane vanished without a trace in the summer of 1982. The rapid knocking echoed at 6:30 a.m. Mr. Harold Kane, Phoenix Police Department. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Lydia Kane." An officer later recounted that the old man's hands trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup, but his face remained eerily calm, as if he had known, sooner or later, this day would come. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to not miss the latest cases. July 1982, Phoenix was engulfed in the scorching dry heat of the Sonoran Desert. The asphalt on North 43rd Avenue reflected blinding sunlight, and the wind carried swirling red dust around the silent one-story homes. That afternoon, Lydia Kane, 19 years old, left the small beige house where she lived with her father, Harold Kane. She carried a brown leather purse, the keys to her old Ford Fairmont, and the faded baseball cap she always wore when driving to work. Harold stood in the yard, leaning against the wooden railing, watching his daughter walk across the gravel path without saying a word. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. McAllen, saw Lydia open the car door, turn back to say something to her father, but the wind swallowed her voice. The dashboard clock showed 6:45 when Lydia pulled out of the driveway, turning west, where the setting sun turned the whole neighborhood a pale copper hue. According to her schedule, she was supposed to work the evening shift at the gas station more than 10 miles away, near West Van Buren Street. But by the time the wall clock in the house ticked past 8, Harold's headlights still shone into the yard, and Lydia hadn't returned. Mr. Kane called the gas station. The manager said she wasn't working that day, having swapped shifts earlier in the week. Harold hung up, silent for a long while, then paced back and forth in the living room. The landline rang again. It was one of Lydia's friends asking if he'd seen her. They had plans to meet that afternoon, but she didn't show up. By 9:30, Harold drove around the familiar routes, from McDowell to Grand Avenue, looking for the Fairmont, but found nothing. No rest stops recorded that license plate. No one remembered seeing Lydia at any gas station or convenience store. When he got home, Harold turned on the porch light, sat by the phone, and waited another hour. The house was silent, only the hum of the air conditioner and the flickering lights from the empty street. At 10:42 p.m., he picked up the phone and dialed the Phoenix police, his voice hoarse and dry. "My daughter hasn't come home," the dispatcher asked when he last saw her, and Harold replied, "Around 7:15. He said there were no unusual signs, no arguments, just that Lydia drove off and didn't return. The police took the missing person report, asking him to wait until the next morning for an official statement. That night, as the minute hand on the small clock ticked past 12, Lydia still hadn't returned. Harold stood silently by the window, eyes fixed on the dark gravel road in front of the yard, where his daughter's car had disappeared. No headlights pierced through, only the dry wind sweeping through the cacti and the monotonous sound of the ceiling fan turning in the quiet house. The next morning, he arrived at the local police station earlier than opening hours, bringing Lydia's graduation photo and a handwritten sheet describing her identifying features. That same morning, the Phoenix police launched a search operation. Patrol teams were dispatched from the central headquarters to the North 43rd Avenue neighborhood. An off-road Jeep and 2 patrol cars fanned out along the routes Lydia might have taken to the gas station. Officers divided into small groups, sweeping along Grand Avenue, checking vacant lots and drainage ditches around Peoria. Hastily printed photos were posted on utility poles, stores, and nearby rest stops. By midday, the Arizona desert heat climbed above 100 degrees, making the road surface shimmer with hazy heat. Some local residents and Lydia's friends volunteered to help. They brought water and binoculars, walking sections of dirt roads, calling her name under the blazing sun. A police Bell Jet Ranger helicopter flew low along the Agua Fria Channel, using thermal lenses to scan for metal or vehicles. On the ground, boots sank into dry sand, radio chatter echoing steadily in the dusty air. Harold drove separately with the search party, his face gaunt, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He didn't say much, just repeated the same question. If she had an accident, why hasn't anyone seen anything? The officers tried to reassure him, but in the harsh sunlight and the desert silence, no one had an answer. That afternoon, an officer in the search team received a tip from a farmer living near the water channel. He had seen a copper-colored car parked motionless in the lot beside the channel since the previous evening. The search team immediately redirected. When they arrived, Lydia's Ford Fairmont was tilted on the soft sand, one front wheel sunk deep. The doors were closed, lights off, no keys in the ignition, no signs of collision or damage. Fine dust covered the hood, indicating it had been there at least one night. The surrounding area was cordoned off. A few officers waded down to the channel bank, shining flashlights along the water's edge. No footprints, no personal items found. When Harold was called to the scene, he stood silently staring at his daughter's car, arms hanging limp. An officer asked if he noticed anything unusual. Harold just shook his head, then turned away, avoiding the gaze of the growing crowd behind the yellow tape. A tow truck was dispatched, and the Ford was taken to the police impound for technical examination. The police continued scanning the surrounding area, expanding the radius another 2 miles west, but results were empty. That night, they set up a temporary command post by the roadside, portable lights illuminating a corner of the desert, the night wind blowing through with a cold, dry earth scent. The next morning, the search extended another day. The helicopter circled overhead again, following the channel, scanning the cracked dry land below. Police, firefighters, and residents searched in silence, only the occasional radio crackle of no discovery. By noon on the third day, the entire effort halted at a single result: the abandoned car, with no trace of Lydia Kane. Harold returned home that afternoon, still in his desert-dusted clothes. He turned off the lights, sat in the chair, looking at the hook where Lydia always hung her car keys each evening. Outside, the sun set, shadows covering the low houses, and the gravel road became quiet as before. At the police station, Lydia's file was updated to missing with suspicion. The search ended, but the questions about what happened to the young girl lingered in the stifling air of that Phoenix summer. Lydia's Ford Fairmont was towed to the Phoenix Police Department's forensic impound early the next morning, when the first sunlight hadn't yet dried the thin dew on the hood. The police sealed the entire vehicle, labeled it Evidence Hold, and pushed it into the enclosed inspection area, where gray tarps were already stretched to block the sun. The room smelled sharply of rubber and cleaning solvents, with the steady hum of industrial fans. 2 forensic technicians, Thompson and Ellis, were responsible for documenting the scene. They started by photographing from every angle: doors, driver's seat, front floor, and rear trunk. The left door was locked tight, with only an even layer of fine dust. Gloved fingers lightly traced the handle without finding scratches or dents. The ignition was undamaged, windows intact. The right door had a few grains of sand in the cracks, but no signs of prying or breaking. The interior was unusually tidy. The dashboard still had a hazy dust layer, except for a small clean circle where something might have been placed, possibly a mini radio or makeup case. The driver's seat was pulled back, fitting Lydia's height, seatbelt unbuckled. On the passenger seat was a folded magazine, its cover yellowed from the sun. Under the seat was a gas receipt from the station near home, dated the previous day, nothing unusual. The trunk held a few personal items: a neatly folded denim jacket, an empty water bottle, an old Arizona map, and a rumpled light brown bandana, stained with dark spots like dried mud. Thompson bagged the bandana in plastic, labeling it possible biological trace. He glanced at Ellis, who was checking the rear of the car, where there were a few small scratches around the taillight assembly. No signs of major collision, but a small piece of the light lens was missing. This detail was noted in the photo log. When opening the hood, they found no damage or oil leaks. The engine was clean, belts intact, oil nearly full. In the glove compartment, only a few coins, a lipstick, and Lydia's work ID. No keys. Cyril stated he had no spare keys, as Lydia always carried them. This puzzled the police. If no keys, who locked the car? By noon, the forensics team continued collecting dust samples, fibers, and biological traces. They scanned the entire interior with ultraviolet light, looking for blood or foreign substances, but found nothing clear. Dust samples from the floor were sealed in plastic bags. The steering wheel and door handles were taped with specialized adhesive to lift fingerprints. Preliminary results: 2 main sets, one matching Lydia's, the other faint and insufficient for comparison. One technician noted, no signs of struggle, no stains, no torn upholstery. The near absolute cleanliness of the car left them perplexed. If this was an attack, there should be at least some sign of resistance or impact. But if Lydia left voluntarily, why abandon the car in the desert? No wallet, no purse, no keys. Everything was too neat, yet too unusual. The police sent the bandana and taillight plastic shard to the Arizona State Lab. In 1982, DNA testing wasn't widely used, so they could only do blood type tests and fiber comparisons. Preliminary results showed the brown stain on the bandana reacted to hemoglobin, possibly blood, but too small a sample for accurate typing. While awaiting results, the investigation team returned to the Agua Fria Channel scene to recheck the area. They mapped the car's position, orientation, and distance to the main dirt road. From that angle, the car seemed deliberately parked, nose facing north, wheels straight, gear in P. Police measured the tire tracks to the water's edge, just over 20 yards, close enough to suggest a mishap, but not falling into the channel. A hypothesis emerged: someone drove the car there, parked it, then left by another means. Harold was invited to inspect again. He walked around the car silently, looked into the driver's seat, then turned away, saying he saw nothing strange. When asked if Lydia often visited the area, he said no, and that his daughter rarely went west. This added to the officer's suspicions. Why did the car appear in an area Lydia never frequented? The following days yielded no more clues. The Agua Fria Channel was dived, but revealed nothing but floating trash. Newspapers ran a short story on page 3. Phoenix police investigating disappearance of 19-year-old girl, car found near Peoria. Then the news was quickly overshadowed by other headlines about weather and politics. In the investigation unit's office, a stack of scene photos was neatly arranged on the desk. Black and white images of the Fairmont sitting alone in the sandy lot, the sun pressing down, shrinking the car's shadow. Under each, simple notes: no evidence of forced entry. Possible biological trace on fabric. Investigation pending. No one knew that, for the next nearly 3 decades, those seemingly insignificant pieces of evidence would sit quietly in a paper box, securely sealed in the storage room behind police headquarters, waiting for the day technology advanced enough to speak for the vanished. But in the summer of 1982, with scant data and a chillingly clean scene, the Phoenix police had to conclude, unable to determine if this was a criminal offense. Only that Lydia Kane had disappeared, leaving behind an empty car and countless unanswered questions. When the car examination ended without clear signs of crime, the police turned to the most obvious: the last person to see Lydia alive, her father Harold Kane. 2 days after the Ford Fairmont was found, Harold was invited to Phoenix Police Headquarters for an official statement. He arrived on time, dressed neatly as always, white shirt, straight khaki pants, shoes dusted lightly with desert sand. His face was gaunt from lack of sleep, but his voice remained calm, slow, and clear. In the small interrogation room, Officer Daniel Morgan and Deputy Inspector Lyle Carter started the recorder, beginning with basic questions: time, location, family situation. Harold said he and his daughter had lived together since his wife died, their relationship normal. Nothing to complain about. He stated that on the afternoon of July 16th, Lydia left home around 6:40 to go to the gas station where she worked, and that was the last time he saw her. She was fine. Nothing unusual. I told her to remember to bring water because it was hot, he said, voice even. Morgan asked if he noticed Lydia carrying anything unusual. Harold shook his head. Just her purse, keys, and the hat she always wore. When asked why he waited until nearly midnight to report her missing, he replied simply, "I thought she was late, or went somewhere with friends. She's done that a few times." Officer Carter glanced at Morgan, jotting a few words in his notebook. That afternoon, the police revisited the neighborhood to cross-check statements. The nearest neighbor, Mrs. McCallan, the widowed woman living across the street, said that on the evening Lydia disappeared, she was watering plants in her yard, and saw the father and daughter talking near the garage. They seemed to be arguing. Lydia turned away quickly, got in the car, slammed the door. I didn't hear clearly, just saw Mr. Harold standing there watching. She said her home clock showed nearly 7:15, about half an hour later than Harold's statement. Another person at the street corner also said they saw Lydia's Fairmont still parked in front of the house around 7:10, when he walked to the convenience store. This information led investigators to question if Lydia left early as her father said. Why did multiple people see her car there half an hour later? When re-questioned about the timeline, Harold stuck to his statement. He said the neighbors might have mistaken the time because her clock always runs slow. He also denied any argument, saying, "We just talked normally." Morgan asked if Lydia ever expressed wanting to leave Phoenix or mentioned going far away. Harold said, "No," then paused a beat, adding, "She talked about a lot of things I don't remember all." The police tried to probe deeper into family relations, but Harold answered briefly. He said Lydia was a good kid, obedient, rarely out at night. When Morgan asked why he thought she left the car at Agua Fria Channel, Harold replied that maybe the car broke down, or someone took the car and left it. He emphasized he didn't know the area, had never been there. Carter asked if he knew why the trunk contained the bandana and map. Harold frowned slightly, saying, "I'm not sure, but she liked collecting old maps." After over an hour of questioning, the investigators only recorded disjointed answers with no real investigative value. However, one thing caught their attention: Harold's unusually calm demeanor. He didn't cry, didn't show panic, only occasionally slowly rubbed his forehead when Lydia was mentioned. When Carter asked if he wanted to send a message in case Lydia was somewhere, he replied, "I just want her to call home." Then he stood up, adjusted his sleeve, and asked to leave. After the session, Morgan and Carter returned to the water channel scene to recheck possible routes Lydia might have taken that evening. They compared Harold's timeline with the gas receipt found in the car. The receipt showed 6:55 p.m. at a station less than 2 miles from the Kane home. If Lydia left at 6:40 as Harold said, she went almost straight there, but the station's camera, a 24-hour loop tape, had long been overwritten. No visual evidence confirmed Lydia's presence there. In the end-of-week summary meeting, Carter remarked, "No signs Harold is lying, but something doesn't add up." Morgan agreed, but admitted no concrete evidence to suspect him. All they had was an empty car, conflicting statements, and a father too calm. With no progress, the case file was shifted to passive monitoring. In the following weeks, police occasionally called Harold for any new info, but he always answered the same, nothing at all. The neighborhood gradually returned to quiet, as if everyone agreed Lydia might have really left, though no one could explain why she'd leave the car in such a remote place. By late August that year, the investigation summary was closed. Police found no clues of crime, nor evidence Lydia was still in Phoenix. Harold stopped going to the station, declined further interviews. In the small house on North 43rd Avenue, he lived alone, still regularly sweeping the yard, mowing the lawn, as if life continued normally. But for the investigation team, Lydia Kane's disappearance officially entered its first silent phase. An open file with no progress, marked by 3 short words on the cover: "Case pending review." In the first 2 weeks after the car was found, no further signs led to Lydia Kane. Phoenix PD decided to expand the search westward from the city, where the desert stretched to the foothills of Estrella. The police Bell Jet Ranger helicopter continued circling the Agua Fria area, while on the ground, groups of officers, firefighters and volunteers spread out in line formations, probing every patch of land, every dry ditch. The harsh weather made everything more difficult than ever, daytime temperatures exceeding 110 degrees, wind blowing like fire, whipping red dust that covered fresh footprints in the sand within minutes. The dirt roads connecting Peoria and Surprise were sparse with homes back then, full of dry grass and low bushes. The search team scanned along shallow ditches, earthen depressions, and abandoned water storage pits. They checked junkyards, containers, and road embankments along the channels. From above, the desert looked like a giant map, with hundreds of crisscrossing tire tracks. Each day, police marked a few more points to check, then crossed them off when nothing turned up. One early August morning, as the sun just rose above the horizon, the Northern Search Group discovered a sunken area near an old concrete bridge over the channel. The soil had settled slightly, with signs of small truck tracks. They stopped, dug a few layers with shovels, finding only dry dirt and glass shards. A bit farther, a volunteer picked up a thin women's cloth glove, faded from the sun, but Harold confirmed it wasn't Lydia's. That evidence led nowhere. After that, the search team headed to the old industrial area in Tolleson, with rows of abandoned warehouses, cracked concrete walls, rusted iron doors creaking when opened. Inside, only dust and cobwebs. Each time a flashlight shone into a dark corner, everyone held their breath, but everything was empty. No body, no traces, no fabric or item matching Lydia. Harold sometimes still joined the search groups, though police didn't require it. He walked quietly, often standing apart, eyes scanning hills and bush rows. One day, people saw him sit down on the channel bank, wide-brimmed hat on, staring distantly at the murky water. A young officer said, he kept asking, if something happened to her somewhere, how did she get here? But no one could answer that question. Time passed. The initial volunteers gradually withdrew. By the 4th week, only a few official Phoenix Police Department officers and a small rescue group maintained searches around flowing water areas. They brought metal detectors, scanning drainage pipes and clay lots, once used for burying trash. Each time the wind blew, sand covered every trace again, making the whole desert seem undisturbed. One evening, the helicopter reported spotting a metallic reflection in the desert, about a mile from the channel area. The ground team immediately moved to the location, carrying flashlights and first aid kits. When they arrived, they only found an old fallen billboard, with broken aluminum pieces reflecting the light from afar. Not a single sign that Lydia had ever been there. In the final days of the operation, people expanded the search to the artificial lake near Surprise, where water stagnated year-round. Divers waded into the murky black water, groping through mud and algae. They pulled up a few strange items: a bicycle frame, a broken chair, but nothing related. Under the scorching sun, the sweat-drenched figures silently packed up their equipment. When the rescue team returned, only the wind howled through the mesquite bushes and abandoned fields. The search maps, densely marked with red symbols, were folded and stacked in the truck. The desert returned to its inherent silence, and with it, the hope of finding Lydia gradually faded. In the old neighborhood, everything returned to normal. Flyers with the image of the 19-year-old girl fluttered tattered on fences, a few remaining ones bleached white by the sun. Harold rarely left the house. He no longer participated in searches, only occasionally driving to church or stopping by the store where Lydia once worked, standing at the door for a few minutes before returning. Neighbors saw him cleaning the yard every morning, taking out the trash on time, but not talking to anyone. In September, the hot winds gradually subsided, giving way to the dry, cold air of the desert autumn. The search that lasted nearly a month ended without results. People began to stop mentioning Lydia. On the local radio, the evening news program only had a few short update lines. No new developments in the disappearance of the young Phoenix girl. After that, no one mentioned it anymore. At the police station, Lydia's Ford car still sat in storage, covered with an additional layer of dust. The scant evidence from it, the brown bandana, the taillight plastic shard, a few fabric fibers, was sealed in a paper box, stacked on a shelf. Other investigators took on new cases, while Lydia Kane's file was neatly set aside, like hundreds of other missing person cases in Arizona at that time. When winter arrived, the wind from the desert carried the characteristic scorched smell of cracked earth and withered cacti. The small house on North 43rd Avenue still had its porch light on every evening. Harold sat alone in the living room, holding a cup of cold coffee, eyes looking out at the gravel road in front of the yard, the road Lydia had once left on, and also the place where he still waited, even though no one was coming back. Out there, the desert seemed to have swallowed every trace of the young girl, leaving only a silent void, a silence longer than any explanation. When the search operation stopped, all hope was nearly exhausted. But in the final days of 1982, the Phoenix Police Department's forensic lab continued its quiet work, examining each piece of evidence collected from Lydia Kane's Ford Fairmont. In the room lit by fluorescent lights, technicians spread out the evidence bags on a metal table, each item carefully numbered, the brown bandana, with dark stains, the small plastic shard from the taillight assembly, a few fabric fibers from the driver's seat, and dust samples from the car floor. The lead technician, Mr. Craig Thompson, who had over 20 years working in the lab, started with the most identifiable item, the bandana. Under the microscope, the dark stain appeared speckled, evenly spread along the folded edge. He dripped a few drops of hemoglobin test solution onto a small cut sample. A pale pink color slowly spread, confirming it was human blood. But that was all they could determine at that time. In 1982, DNA testing was not used in criminal investigations. Forensics could only determine blood type, and this sample was too small, mostly dried and oxidized by high temperatures. The only result, type O blood, a common group accounting for nearly half the population. It didn't help identify anyone. They continued with the taillight plastic shard. Under the spotlight, Thompson noticed the broken edge was very clean, not from a strong collision, but seemingly snapped off beforehand. He compared it to photos of Lydia's car taillight. Indeed, a small piece was missing in the corresponding position, proving it was just part of the car itself, not another vehicle. Collision possibility ruled out. He noted simply, no external impact, self-fragment. The fabric fibers from the driver's seat were placed in petri dishes, examined under fluorescent light for bodily fluid traces. No suspicious signs. Dust from the car floor was mostly fine sand from the Peoria area, mixed with a few dried plant fibers, completely consistent with the car being parked by the channel for a few days. A young technician suggested trying to find shoe prints, but the carpet was too clean, nothing clear imprinted. Throughout many weeks, the technicians repeated the process with each sample, hoping to discover something new, but results remained empty. Each report closed with the line, insufficient evidence for comparison. No blood enough to determine gender, no clear foreign fingerprints, no signs of struggle or foreign objects. The car was almost a clean void, too clean to lead them to any conclusion. The police had hoped the bandana piece would open a new direction, but after comparing the blood type with local hospital donor records, no matches. They also couldn't confirm if it was Lydia's blood or someone else's, as Harold said she had no injuries before leaving home. When asked, he vaguely recalled that Lydia occasionally used the bandana to tie her hair or wipe her hands when working, so the blood-stained cloth wasn't enough to prove anything. In early 1983, A new group of Phoenix PD investigators was assigned to review the file. They read through the reports, re-examined scene photos, then concluded that this disappearance lacked clear criminal elements. No body, no witnesses, no obvious motive. Meanwhile, new cases kept pouring in from across Maricopa County, pushing the Lydia Kane case further down the priority list. In the forensic lab, the scant evidence from the case was carefully repacked. The bandana was placed in a nylon bag, vacuum sealed to prevent damage. The plastic shard, fabric fibers, small test tubes with sand samples were all labeled and sealed. The brown evidence box was numbered 82 PHX 3177, placed on a wooden shelf with hundreds of others. On the outside, with a black marker, a technician added, "Pending future testing, blood trace." Occasionally, Thompson still glanced at the box when passing by. He told a young colleague, "If one day there's better technology, this will tell us more than now." The colleague just smiled, because at that time, gene testing still sounded far-fetched like science fiction. As the summer of 1983 passed, everything around the Lydia Kane case sank into silence. Radio news no longer mentioned her name, and the channel area where the car was found was covered by wind, burying old tire tracks. At home, Harold still lived alone, avoiding reporters. People occasionally saw him walking around the neighborhood in the evenings, the house porch light still on as always. In the storage room, the small evidence box sat quietly under dim yellow lights. No one knew that inside it, the stiff dried bandana and taillight plastic shard would be preserved intact for the next 30 years. Things that seemed useless at the time, but later would become the key to reopening the case. But at that point, with technical limitations and the massive backlog of files waiting to be processed, Lydia Kane's disappearance was considered one of hundreds of cases inactive in Phoenix. It had no weapon, no body, no evidence confirming a crime. And like many other cases dusted over by time, it quietly disappeared from newspaper headlines, from investigation meetings, existing only in a few short dry file lines, where the only conclusion recorded was insufficient data to determine criminal activity. From early 1984, the name Lydia Kane almost vanished from all Phoenix news. Her disappearance, which had once stirred the people around North 43rd Avenue for months, was now only a faint memory. The police found no body, no suspect, no new evidence. The file was transferred to the Phoenix Police Department's archive, along with hundreds of other unsolved cases, where cardboard boxes stacked in rows high to the ceiling, numbered and sealed by year. Among them, Box 82 PHX 3177 sat quietly on the third shelf at the end of row B. Inside were the bandana, car light plastic shard, and a few scene photos that had yellowed. Time passed. The investigators once in charge of the case retired or transferred one by one. The old forensic room moved to a new, more modern building, but the evidence was no longer mentioned by anyone. The department's storage system at that time was still handwritten, many files forgotten under thick dust. No one expected that one day, technology would be powerful enough to make those pieces of evidence speak. Throughout the 1980s, the city of Phoenix changed rapidly. Suburban areas sprang up densely. Highways expanded connecting Peoria and Glendale. The desert region where Lydia's car was once found was leveled, replaced by parking lots and shopping centers. New residents knew nothing of the girl who disappeared years ago. Only a few old neighbors, occasionally when meeting, still mentioned briefly that little Lydia was never found. Harold Kane stayed in the old house for a few more years, then sold it, moving to Prescott Valley. In the old neighborhood, the porch light he turned on every night waiting for his daughter was gradually replaced by the garden lights of new owners. In 1991, Arizona established the Cold Case Investigation Unit, a small group of veteran investigators specializing in reviewing long-pending cases. However, due to limited manpower, most files were only revisited when new evidence emerged or when linked to another case. Lydia Kane didn't fit that. No perpetrator, no confirmed victim, no clear motive. Her file remained untouched, with a new label added, inactive. Unsolved. By the late 1990s, forensic technology began major advances. Labs in Tucson and Phoenix started implementing STR chain DNA identification methods. Some old cases from the 70s were reopened, leading to many perpetrators prosecuted after decades. But Lydia's evidence box was overlooked, simply because no one proposed retesting. Investigators at the time thought the sample amount was too small, damaged after years of storage. In the 2000s, Phoenix continued expanding the cold case unit. A new storage facility was built in the south of the city, equipped with temperature-stable storage and digital data systems. During the 2005 file transfer, all evidence from the 80s was moved there. In that process, Box 82, PHX 3177, was re-inventoried, still fully sealed. A young technician at that time noted briefly in the electronic file, possible biological trace, not tested for DNA. In 2008, the city launched the Phoenix Evidence Re-Evaluation Initiative, aiming to review all unexplained missing person cases. Hundreds of files were listed, including Lydia Kane's. When the lab's new software allowed storing image data and reanalyzing samples, the bandana was rephotographed with a digital microscope, saving high-resolution scans. No one expected that small action had inadvertently saved the sample from being destroyed per the standard 30-year cycle. By 2010, Carla Rivera, a new investigator transferred from Tucson, was assigned to review long-term missing files. She was a different generation from her predecessors, accustomed to electronic databases, believing in technology's value and data connectivity. When reading Lydia Kane's case, Rivera immediately noticed the description bandana with blood-like stain. Among cases with remaining biological samples, it was one of the few from the early 80s still testable. She pulled the evidence file from the shelf, opened the lid. Inside, the cloth had turned pale gray, folded edge stiff and dry. The taillight plastic shard still in its nylon bag, label paper yellowed. Rivera photographed everything, sent sample info to the Arizona State Forensic Lab for DNA testing permission. At this point, the federal CODIS system had been operational for nearly 2 decades, and each year hundreds of old cases were solved by matching DNA to stored samples in the database. Also in that review, Rivera noticed the note in Harold Kane's old interrogation transcript, "Does not remember exactly the time daughter left home." A small detail deemed unimportant in 1982, now made her pause longer. With a seasoned investigator's intuition, Rivera knew the coldest cases sometimes started from a small contradiction in the narrative. Early 2011, Carla Rivera was officially assigned to handle Lydia Kane's disappearance. She received a file nearly 300 pages thick, mostly yellowed photocopies and faded scene photos. On the cover, the line 82 PHX 3177, Missing Person Suspicious Circumstances, was handwritten. The black ink faded, almost blending into the paper. Rivera placed it on the desk, sat still for a long while before opening it. Rivera's first task was checking the remaining evidence. The brown box containing the bandana, plastic shard, and a few sand samples was brought out from cold storage. The storage room staff scanned the code, confirmed the seal intact. Rivera personally opened the old seal, feeling the dry tape crack away from the paper clearly. She donned gloves, picked up the bandana. The fabric had discolored, but the faint dark stain remained on the folded edge. "This is the only thing that can still speak," she said softly. A portion of the sample was separated and sent to the Arizona State Forensic Lab in Tempe, which now had new generation STR DNA testing systems. This technology was sensitive enough to extract gene chains from extremely small, even heavily damaged samples. At the same time, Rivera requested cross-checking the list of people involved in the file, especially Harold Kane, with the federal CODIS database, which stored DNA from millions of citizens from veterans programs, military recruitment, and civilian criminal records. While awaiting results, Rivera began reviewing old statements. She read each transcript page, noting timelines and conflicting details. Harold said Lydia left at 6:40, but 2 witnesses affirmed seeing her car around 7:15. The gas receipt in the car showed 6:55, meaning someone used it at a time between the 2 statements. What caught Rivera's attention most was how Harold described that evening. He insisted no argument, nothing strange. While neighbors said they seemed to be disputing, she underlined the phrase calm demeanor in the 1982 interrogation report, then wrote beside it, overly controlled, possible suppression. Rivera went to the image archive. The Ford car photos were digitized from old film, now displayed on screen with low resolution, but still enough to see the unusual cleanliness inside the car. Not a stain, no signs of struggle, no stray hair. With experience in family crime investigations, she knew that perfection in a scene was often not random. Someone had tried to make everything too clean. She requested leadership approval from the cold case unit to reopen the investigation file, changing status from archived to active review. A small team was formed, including 2 forensic technicians and a data clerk specializing in retrieving old files. They began reconstructing the case timeline to new standards: disappearance time, car discovery, Harold's activities, neighbor witnesses, and possible routes Lydia might have taken. When reviewing Harold's 1982 financial records, Rivera found a notable detail. 3 days after Lydia disappeared, he bought 6 bags of Portland cement at a building materials store less than 2 miles from home. The purchase receipt had a signature and customer code matching Harold's tax records. At the time, police had asked, but he replied repairing the garage foundation, and no one verified. Rivera opened old cadastral maps of the house area on North 43rd Avenue, discovering a small area behind the yard once marked as water storage tank, sealed 1983. The note made her pause. She contacted the cadastral office for original maps and building permits from the 1980s. Results showed that nearly a year after Lydia disappeared, Harold applied to fill the old water tank and pour new cement foundation. Meanwhile, the Tempe Forensic Lab contacted back, reporting the bandana sample tested positive for human DNA. Enough to extract the gene chain. Full results would take a few weeks. Rivera suppressed her emotions, only replying, "Thank you. Please prioritize." It was the first time in nearly 3 decades that evidence in Lydia Kane's case was truly brought to scientific light. By mid-March, the official DNA results were sent back. Rivera opened the envelope in her small office. The report was 4 pages long, but she only needed to look at the first line. The sample retrieved from cloth, Item 82 PHX 3177, A contains a male DNA profile. Initial database search indicates a possible familial match to subject Harold R. Kane, Veterans Affairs Database. She exhaled slowly. After nearly 30 years, the small cloth in the car trunk had finally spoken. Rivera leaned back in her chair, looking at the timeline board. Every detail seemed to be gradually fitting together. Conflicting statements, the backyard plot, and now DNA matching relatives with the father. But instead of a sense of victory, she only felt a familiar stillness. Cases like this were rarely simple. More evidence was needed, confirmation, absolute caution. The next day, Rivera submitted a report to the cold case unit chief, proposing to officially open a criminal investigation with Harold Kane as person of interest. Lydia Kane's file, dusted over for 3 decades, was now marked again in red ink, active case. In the old storage room, the evidence box was moved to a separate cabinet, new label. When Rivera passed by, she placed her hand on the lid, as if thanking the girl who had been silent for all those years, but never truly disappeared. Outside, desert sunlight pierced through the glass door, sweeping a long strip of light on the tile floor. A case thought dead was now breathing again. For the first time since the summer of 1982. The results from the Tempe Forensic Lab arrived one early April morning as Rivera just stepped into the office. Thick envelope, sealed, with Arizona State red stamp. She tore it open right at the desk, eyes scanning each printed line. The DNA chain extracted from the bandana sample not only gave clear results, but fully matched Harold Kane's sample, which he had voluntarily submitted when participating in the Veterans Program. No longer familial match, as in the preliminary report. This was a direct match. The male blood sample on the cloth in Lydia's car was her own father's. No one else had been in close contact with the car more than Harold, at least according to him. And now, physical evidence confirmed he had lied. That afternoon, she called the data room to extract all of Harold's financial records in the period after Lydia disappeared. The electronic storage system showed 3 notable transactions: buying 6 cement bags, renting a small soil compactor, and paying for material delivery service in August 1982. Rivera recalled the building permit he applied for a few months after the case temporarily closed, filling the backyard water tank. The timing matched perfectly. She drove to the old cadastral map archive in central Phoenix. In the cold room, smelling of damp paper, she flipped through handwritten drawings of the old house area on North 43rd Avenue. The 1982 map showed the backyard of the Kane home with an area marked as water tank concrete. The 1984 drawing, after Harold's permit to repair the foundation, had that area erased, replaced with filled and sealed. Rivera photographed it, then took a copy of the building permit with Harold's signature. The next day, Rivera went to Peoria, where the Kane family's old house now had new owners. It was a 1-story house, cream-colored, with a white fence around. The new owners, an elderly couple, were surprised to hear about the old case. They said the backyard once had a concrete water tank, but they never dug anything there because the foundation had been poured thick with cement. Rivera stepped into the yard, standing right where the map marked. Hot wind blew through, carrying the smell of dry grass and dusty soil. She bent down, touching the old cement layer that had lightly cracked, covered in patchy moss. He chose this spot, she thought. Rivera decided to check Harold's vehicle history further. The DMV database showed that in 1982, he owned a gray Ford F-150 pickup, registered at the same address as Lydia's house. That type of vehicle matched the plastic shard sample collected from the trunk of Lydia's Ford, a detail overlooked in the old file because at the time they couldn't accurately identify its origin. If that plastic shard belonged to Harold's vehicle, it could have broken during a collision or while moving heavy objects, something Lydia was carrying, or her herself. When Rivera presented the hypothesis to the forensics team, one expert nodded. If he really transported Lydia in his own vehicle, it's possible from the backyard to the water channel area, then left her Ford there to mislead. She didn't respond, just silently looked at the photo of the Fairmont sitting isolated in the empty lot. Now, the only thing missing was where he could have hidden the body. Late at night, she reopened the cadastral map, comparing it with current satellite data. The house was in an area that had been rezoned, but the boundary of the old tank still showed faintly like a scar on the ground. Rivera circled that area, marking its survey point #1. Tomorrow morning, she would request a survey warrant from the Peoria police to check the terrain with ground-penetrating radar. When leaving the office, she paused to look at the board with Lydia Kane's photo, the picture of the young girl smiling in the sun, her eyes clear and distant. Below the photo, Rivera wrote a small line, "The truth is buried somewhere." She didn't know those words would be true both figuratively and literally, because just a few weeks later, what lay deep under that old cement layer would make all of Phoenix mention the name Lydia Kane again. And a man who thought he had escaped the past was about to face it. According to the old file, Harold said Lydia left home at 6:40 to go to work. Her car was found more than 10 miles away by the Agua Fria channel, and the gas receipt in the car recorded 6:55 p.m. at the station near home, meaning in just 15 minutes, Lydia had bought gas, left the station, and disappeared. But according to neighbors, the Fairmont was still parked in the Kane yard until around 7:10 or 7:15. That made those 15 minutes a blind spot, an interval where Lydia couldn't have been in both places at once. Rivera opened the map, using a red pen to mark the route from Lydia's house to the gas station. The distance was only 3 miles, running along Grand Avenue. If going straight, she would arrive in less than 8 minutes. The 6:55 gas receipt could be correct. But the person standing there didn't necessarily have to be Lydia. Anyone with the car keys or someone who forced her to return home could have held that receipt. Rivera looked at the writing on the invoice. The signature was stretched out, completely different from the old Kane signature in the bank records. She remembered a detail in the old statement. Harold insisted he had no spare keys. If so, why was the car locked when found? There were only two possibilities. Lydia locked it herself before disappearing, or someone else had the keys. Rivera noted beside it, possibility, Harold duplicated key. When comparing the original statement transcripts, she noticed strange pauses in Harold's responses. He paused the longest at the question. When Lydia left, what did she say to you? He replied, just goodbye. No emotion, no additional details, even though other normal fathers often recounted very clearly the last words they heard from their child. Rivera continued with the route Lydia might have taken if she really left home. According to the 1982 positioning diagram, the path from North 43rd Avenue to the Agua Fria Channel had to pass at least 2 intersections with gas stations and stores. No witnesses saw Lydia there, even though it was evening rush hour. With the density of passers-by, the fact that no one saw her was almost impossible. That further reinforced the suspicion that Lydia never left the neighborhood. She turned to Harold's Ford F-150 pickup, registered at the same home address. The plastic shard sample from Lydia's trunk had been re-examined. Results confirmed it was the same type of plastic and production code as Harold's vehicle taillight assembly. Rivera looked at the enlarged photo of the plastic shard, a sharp, clean break, like from hitting a hard object. She flipped to the photo of the Kane backyard from that time, high brick wall, a concrete path leading to the garage, cement water tank in the garden corner. If a conflict happened here, it was the ideal place to hide. Every detail in the file now pointed to one thing: Lydia might have died right at home. And Harold was the one who staged the false scene by leaving his daughter's car near the water channel. She stuck another scene photo on the board, drawing arrows between house and canal, writing a short line, body never left property. To test the hypothesis, Rivera decided to return to the old house again. This time with a forensic technician and modern survey equipment. They brought a GPR ground-penetrating radar scanner, which could detect voids or differing soil layers beneath the cement surface. The new homeowners agreed, somewhat more curious than concerned. Rivera stood in the backyard, watching the scanner move slowly over the foundation. The screen displayed even reflection waves until a 3-meter-long area, nearly 2 meters deep, showed a clear difference. The technician stopped, looked at her, nodded. There's something here. Rivera stayed silent, just circled the area in red on the map. She didn't need to guess further. The old water tank had been filled with more than just cement. Back at the station, she reported the results to her superiors. The cold case unit chief, a man with extensive experience, after listening only said, "If you're sure, we'll request a search warrant." Rivera knew it wasn't easy. Harold had never been charged, and this was private property that had changed owners. But the facts she brought were strong enough. His DNA in the evidence, the vehicle light shard matching his, the void under the cement foundation, matching the water tank position he once claimed to have filled. While awaiting the legal process, Rivera continued cross-checking statements. She found the old recording in the department's cassette archive, the July 1982 interrogation of Harold. The sound was scratchy, his voice hoarse and calm. "I don't know where she went. She drove off and didn't come back." But when listening closely, Rivera noticed a small noise at the end of the sentence. A sound like something heavy falling on a hard floor. She rewound a few times, not sure what it was, only feeling chills down her spine. It could be someone tapping the table, or something dropping on the garage floor when he lied. 2 days later, the official search warrant was approved. Rivera signed the paper, her palms sweating. After 30 years, Lydia Kane's disappearance finally had a chance to escape the shadow of the old file. Rivera put the map in her briefcase, turned off the lights. In the dim darkness, the white chalk line on the board was still clear. House first. The rest will follow. She knew, tomorrow morning, when the drill cut through that cement layer, Phoenix would have to hear again the story this city thought it had long forgotten. On the morning of June 12, 2011, the forensics team and investigator Carla Rivera arrived at the old house on North 43rd Avenue, with a search warrant signed by the Maricopa County Court. Summer sunlight poured down like fire, the ground hot enough that shoes left marks on the foundation still etched with damp. The new homeowners stood on the porch, both curious and uneasy, witnessing the line of police cars stopping at the gate. Rivera held up the warrant, saying briefly, "We need to check the cement foundation area in the backyard, the old water tank position. We won't cause excessive damage." The owner nodded, retreating inside. The concrete cutting drill started roaring, gray dust flying thick in the air. Rivera donned protective goggles, standing to observe each layer of cement being separated. Less than a meter deep, the surface began to change from dark gray to light gray, mixed with fine sand and red dirt. The technicians slowed down, switching to handheld tools. When the last cement layer was removed, the smell of years-old damp earth rose pungently. Under the flashlight, another material layer appeared, torn old cement bags, still with the words Portland Cement, Phoenix Construction Company. Rivera recognized the name immediately. She had seen it in the purchase records, Herald signed in July 1982. Her heart pounded. The technicians carefully cleared the dirt, then used probes to check the foundation hardness. When the probe tip hit something hard and metallic, they stopped. "There's an object," one said. Rivera knelt down, using a small brush to gradually sweep away the soil layer. A faintly shiny object appeared, a rusted metal frame, round like a tank mouth. Below, peeking out, were rotted fabric pieces and something like old rough leather. No one said a word. Rivera breathed deeply, whispering, "Seal the area. Dig down slowly." It took nearly 3 hours to remove the old water tank mouth. Inside, about 2 meters deep, was soil mixed with sand and scattered items. A rotted women's shoe, broken strap, leather belt fragments, shattered plastic frames. A technician bent down, lifting what remained of a silver ring, tarnished but still engraved LK on the inside band. Rivera stood silent, her hands clenched tight. The police cordoned off the area, calling in the specialized forensics team to the scene. Gradually, bone fragments were found in the tank, not intact, but enough to identify as adult female human bones. Right beside the remains of jeans, they found a torn leather wallet, inside still some paper scraps. One of them was a receipt from Valley Gas Station, dated July 16, 1982, with the stretched L. Kane signature. Identical to the signature on the gas invoice in the car, Rivera felt a chill down her spine. The receipt in the car was just the second copy. The original was here, with Lydia. All evidence was sealed, transferred to the state forensic lab. Subsequent analysis confirmed DNA from the bone samples matched hair samples from Lydia's comb in 1982. An item police had taken for comparison when she first disappeared. No doubt, the remains found under the house foundation were Lydia Kane's. News of the discovery spread quickly within the Phoenix police. Rivera and the cold case unit chief were invited to the district prosecutor's office to present the entire chain of evidence. They provided a summary: Harold's DNA on the bandana, the plastic shard matching his vehicle, the cement-filled water tank after the disappearance, along with the body discovery right in the property he once owned. The chief prosecutor only needed to hear that much before setting down his pen, saying softly, "From now on, we no longer call this a disappearance. This is first-degree murder." As night fell, the technicians continued excavating. At the tank bottom, they discovered more small items, a red plastic piece identified as part of the F-150 taillight, some rusted bolts, and especially a delivery slip from Phoenix Construction Company. Signed Harold R. Kane. Dated July 19, 1982. 3 days after Lydia was reported missing. Right beside the slip, a rusted hammer was found, wooden handle still with dark stains embedded. All were collected. When the hammer sample was sent to Tempe, results confirmed traces of female human blood, matching Lydia's DNA. Rivera read the report, her hands trembling slightly. Everything was closed. The tool, motive, location, and the only possible perpetrator. 3 days later, the Maricopa County prosecutor held a press conference. Behind the wooden podium, black and white photos of Lydia and Harold were placed side by side. The spokesperson announced, based on physical evidence, DNA testing and examination results at the property formerly owned by Harold Kane. The prosecutor's office officially determines Mr. Harold Richard Kane as the primary suspect in the murder of Lydia Kane, occurring in July 1982, a first-degree murder case. In January 2012, exactly 30 years since Lydia Kane disappeared, Yavapai County Police coordinated with Phoenix Cold Case Unit to arrest Harold Richard Kane at his small house in the suburbs of Prescott Valley. That morning, no one in this quiet neighborhood knew that the kindly neighbor man, who still walked his dog every day and often helped neighbors shovel snow in winter, was about to be handcuffed for killing his own daughter. 6:15 a.m. Thin snow still clung to the roofs, the air cold enough that breath was visible in the mist. 2 police cars parked quietly at the corner of Meadowlark Drive, lights off. Rivera, in a thick black coat, stood behind the first car. She looked through the windshield, seeing the front door of the white-painted house still silent. When the clock hit exactly 6:30, the task force advanced, knocking hard 3 times. Inside there was movement, then a man's hoarse voice. "Who's there?" "Phoenix Police, Mr. Harold Kane. Open up, we have a warrant." The door opened a crack. Harold appeared, hair almost all white, body thin and stooped. He wore a gray sweater, eyes mixed between confusion and incomprehension. Rivera stood behind 2 officers, holding up the arrest warrant. "Mr. Kane, we have a warrant for your arrest for first-degree murder in connection with the death of Lydia Kane, July 1982. Harold froze, mouth moving without words. When an officer read the Miranda rights, he only asked softly, "What did you say, Lydia? She's back?" They handcuffed him, leading him to the car in silence. The whole neighborhood began peeking through curtains, a few neighbors stepping out, watching in disbelief. A middle-aged woman, who had lived next to Harold for 10 years, later told the press that he was quiet, kind, always helping people. "I never saw him get angry." But when the police car rolled away from the small road, that neighborhood was never quiet as before. The news spread quickly. Phoenix local TV interrupted the morning program for breaking news. After 30 years, Phoenix police have arrested Harold Richard Kane, 68, accused of killing his daughter, Lydia Kane, missing in 1982. The body was found last year in his former property on North 43rd Avenue, Phoenix. Within hours, national newspapers and major news networks all reported simultaneously. Headlines stretched across screens: 30-year case, father accused of killing daughter, the final silence broken. Phoenix cold case, DNA brings 1982 crime to light. On local forums, hundreds commented, mostly stunned. Many who lived in Phoenix in the early 80s wrote that they still remembered the disappearance of the blonde girl driving the Ford Fairmont. Now, knowing her body was buried right in her father's backyard, everyone was speechless. That same day, Rivera held a short press conference at Phoenix Police Headquarters. She spoke little, voice low but firm. "We never forgot Lydia Kane. This case shows time may pass, but the truth remains. DNA technology, along with the cold case team's determination, has given her the final voice." When asked about the suspect, Rivera only replied, "Mr. Harold Kane is still cooperating, and we will interrogate according to legal procedures." At Prescott Valley, Harold was transferred that day to Phoenix, held temporarily at the Maricopa County Detention Center. In the small interrogation room, Rivera sat across from him, over the cold metal table. The ceiling light shone dimly, casting their shadows on the wall. Harold maintained an eerily calm demeanor, hands clasped together. "Do you know why we're here, Mr. Kane?" Rivera asked. He looked at her, voice slow. "You said, Lydia, you found her." "Yes," Rivera replied. "Right under the old water tank foundation behind your house." A long silence stretched. Harold bowed his head, eyes closed, but showed nothing beyond fatigue. "We have your DNA evidence in Lydia's car," she continued. "Your blood on the bandana found in the trunk. Do you want to explain?" Harold opened his eyes, looking down at the table. "My blood? I don't remember. You said you never drove Lydia's car, but we have a piece of your F-150 taillight in it." He sighed. "I just cleaned it after the police said Lydia was missing. I thought if I cleaned it, they'd find clues easier." Rivera stared at him. "You poured cement over your daughter's body because you wanted to help the police?" For the first time, Harold closed his eyes for a long time. Slight tremor passed over his cheek. He said softly, almost mumbling, "I don't know. I just remember a lot of yelling, then silence. I didn't mean to." Rivera stayed silent, letting the gap stretch. Any admission, even vague, had value. But Harold said no more. He just sat still, eyes drifting blankly toward the white wall. Outside, media surrounded the Phoenix Police Headquarters. TV station vans parked along the street, antennas raised high, lights illuminating a corner of the city. Hundreds of residents gathered, many who knew Lydia, bringing flowers and old photos placed before the police fence. A handwritten sign, 30 years later, "Justice finds her." The small interrogation room had only two people, Harold Kane sitting on the other side of the cold metal table, wrists still marked by cuffs, and Carla Rivera, silent, placing before him a thick file stack, neatly arranged to every corner. In the hallway, dim yellow light shone through the one-way glass. On the other side of that glass, two other officers were observing, one taking notes, the other staring at the live recording screen. "Mr. Kane," Rivera began, voice even and low, "today I want to hear you tell the whole story in your own words. The night of July 16th, 1982. What happened in that house?" Harold looked up, eyes tired, deep set. He was 68, hair silver and disheveled, voice hoarse from a dry throat. "I already said, it was an accident." Rivera nodded slightly, not interrupting. "An accident," she repeated. "Can you tell me more, Lydia?" She got angry. "So did I." Arguing, just a small thing, she was going to leave. I tried to hold her back, pulled her arm. She slipped and fell. She hit her head on the table edge in the garage. When I ran over, she wasn't breathing anymore. She let a silence hang, looking straight into his eyes. "And what did you do after that?" Harold licked his lips, avoiding her gaze. "I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I thought I had to bury her. I didn't want anyone to know. People would think I killed her." Rivera said nothing, just opened the file. She took out a transparent plastic bag. Inside the brown bandana, turned gray. "Do you recognize this?" Harold nodded slightly. "Lydia's. The blood on it is yours," she said, voice light but sharp as a knife. "Your DNA matches 100%. You say it was an accident, so why is your blood on the cloth found in Lydia's trunk, the car you said you never touched?" Harold was silent. The air conditioner on the ceiling blew steadily, cold. Rivera continued, her voice lowering. "We also have the taillight plastic shard from your F-150, found in the trunk of Lydia's Ford. You said you never had those two vehicles near each other. So how do you explain that?" Harold swallowed hard, his throat tightening. "I don't remember. Maybe I bumped into it while cleaning the car." "Cleaning the car?" Rivera leaned forward. "After Lydia disappeared, you cleaned her car spotless, locked it, and left it by the water channel, correct? Because you wanted to stage a scene, to make people think your daughter was kidnapped." He looked at her, eyes flashing with both anger and fear. No, I just, I just wanted to hide that she fell. I didn't kill her. I swear." Rivera stayed silent, opening the scene photos file. The newly taken pictures from the water tank were laid out before him. Cracked cement, bone fragments, the silver ring engraved with LK, and the delivery slip with his signature. She said nothing more, just pushed each photo toward him. Harold looked down. His hands trembled slightly, fingers brushing the photo of the ring before pulling back as if touching fire. "She was still wearing this ring?" he asked softly. "Yes," Rivera replied. "She was wearing it when we found her." A very long silence followed. Harold bowed his head, hands clenching tightly. In his voice, the initial defensiveness began to crumble. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just lost control." "So why lie for 30 years?" Rivera asked, her tone unchanged. "Because I was scared," he answered, eyes still down. "After she fell, I carried her to the yard. I thought I could save her, but she wasn't breathing. I panicked. I took the car, planned to drive to the hospital, but then thought I'd be blamed. So I left her car near the channel. I wanted people to believe she left. I didn't know what else to think. Then I buried her in the old water tank. I couldn't bear to see her anymore." Rivera sat still, her gaze unwavering. "You know," she said, voice lowering, "for 30 years, people searched for Lydia everywhere. The desert, lakes, even those channels. But she was always right behind your house. You lived on that cement foundation, ate, slept, drank coffee, and walked over the very place you buried your daughter." Harold closed his eyes, his breathing uneven. A bead of sweat ran from his temple down his cheek. He raised his hand, then let it fall. "I didn't think anyone would find her. I just wanted it all to end." Rivera slowly closed the file. "You know," she said, "if you had just called for help that day, Lydia might still be alive. But you chose to hide, to stage a scene, to lie to the police, and to live as if nothing happened. That's no longer an accident, Mr. Kane. That's murder." Harold didn't respond. He looked down at his daughter's photo, her youthful face, bright eyes. A small sound escaped his throat, half a sob, half a sigh. "She fell," he whispered. "I just wanted to keep her. She said she'd leave home, and I couldn't stand it. I grabbed her arm, she pushed me away, then fell. I thought it was just a minor injury. I put her on the chair, but blood was flowing. I didn't have time." His voice trailed off. Rivera didn't interrupt. She knew silence was sometimes a stronger tool than any question. Finally, Harold looked up, eyes red. "I buried her with my own hands. I remember, that night was hot. I dug all night. I poured cement to make sure no one would know. I didn't think they'd find her." The room was deathly silent. On the other side of the glass, the lead investigator nodded. The interrogation had achieved what was impossible for 30 years, a confession. Rivera looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Thank you, Harold. Now Lydia finally has her own voice." 3 days after the final interrogation, when Harold Kane officially signed his trembling handwritten statement, the Phoenix Cold Case team began the next phase, verifying the confession with physical evidence. In his statement, Harold had specified, "I buried Lydia in the plot behind the old house in Peoria, near the mesquite trees, where the spare water tank used to be." Early morning on April 15, 2012, Rivera was at the scene with the Arizona State Forensics team and 2 criminal archaeologists. The plot was isolated on the edge of Peoria, now a scattered residential area with knee-high dry grass and cacti. The land Harold mentioned now belonged to a young family who had agreed to cooperate and temporarily left the house until the excavation was complete. The early morning sun was still mild, but the air was already dry and harsh. Rivera wore a reflective vest, looking over the backyard, just a 10-meter-long patch, bordered by old bricks. In the center of the yard, fine cracks and faint cement traces showed a structure had once been buried. She signaled the GPR ground-penetrating radar team to start scanning. Dense reflection waves appeared on the screen, then paused at a rectangular, unnatural depression about 1.5 meters deep. "This is the spot," Rivera said softly. The excavation order was read in front of the forensics team. The concrete cutting machine started, its engine tearing through the morning stillness. Cement layers cracked open, revealing dark soil beneath. Forensic technicians knelt, using small hand shovels to clear debris, layer by layer. The air filled with the smell of damp and old cement dust. After over an hour, with the sun now high, a small bone fragment appeared in the soil. The technician stopped, signaled. Rivera stepped forward, heart racing, then ordered all machinery stopped. "Hand dig from here," she said. The team switched to soft brushes, carefully peeling away the clinging soil. Gradually, a human skeleton's shape emerged. Lying on its left side, arms close to the chest, skull slightly cracked at the temple. "There's fabric," one said, gently lifting a faded denim piece. Beneath the soil, they found more small items, a rusted metal clasp, a shirt button, and a dull, round metal object. Rivera bent down to see. It was a women's wristwatch, cracked glass, hand stopped at 7:12. She exhaled slowly. Each item was numbered, placed in evidence bags. Under the skeleton's right foot, they found a pair of old rotted shoes, leather straps peeling. On the left hand, the silver ring engraved with LK remained intact, only slightly deformed by time. Everything was photographed, positions noted, before the remains were removed from the pit. When the final bone frame was placed on a white sheet, the team fell silent. Desert wind blew through, stirring red dust. Rivera stepped back, removing her gloves, eyes fixed on the white sheet. 30 years, and Lydia Kane was finally seen again, no longer a shadow in a file, but a real person, flesh and bone, buried where she once lived. That afternoon, all evidence was transferred to the Arizona State Forensic Lab in Tempe for analysis. Rivera rode with the convoy, sitting in the back, hands gripping the file tightly. She knew this wasn't just an excavation. It was the final confirmation to close a 30-year circle. At the lab, Dr. Neil Cartwright, human bone forensic expert, directly oversaw the examination. The bone fragments were cleaned, arranged by structure. Cartwright pointed to the skull, voice low. "This crack is from a strong impact with a hard, narrow-edged object. Concentrated force, likely a hammer or metal rod." Rivera nodded, recalling the rusted hammer found in the water tank the previous year. The skull crack matched the hammer handle's curve perfectly. Long bone samples were sent to the DNA lab for identification. 3 days later, results came back. DNA fully matched Lydia Kane's hair sample from 1982. The report also noted cement calcium traces in the bones, indicating the body was buried and covered with concrete shortly after death. No doubt, this was Lydia. Rivera stood before the examination table, looking at the nearly complete skeleton. On the nearby table, personal items were neatly arranged: watch, ring, shoes, rusted clasp, a few remaining blonde hairs. These small things were all that remained of a 19-year-old girl who left home one summer afternoon and never returned. That evening, Rivera returned to the office, documenting every detail in the final excavation report. She typed each line, pausing at victim identified, Lydia Kane, female, born 1963. Under personal notes, she added, "The ground kept silent for 30 years. Today, it gave back the answer." The Arizona State Forensic Lab took nearly 3 weeks to complete all scientific analyses. Rivera attended the final report meeting in early May 2012 with forensic experts and Maricopa County prosecutors. On the large meeting room screen, Dr. Neil Cartwright presented forensic results in a calm but heavy voice. He pointed to the skull photo. "Here, right temporal region, a 4.8 centimeters fracture, top-down narrow contact angle. Based on the fracture structure and compression, this is an injury from a solid metal small-headed object. The injury matches the 1-pound iron hammer found in the old water tank." The next image was a 3D simulation of the wound. When Cartwright activated the projection, it showed the force trajectory from behind right downward, likely the victim turning away or bending low. With such impact force, Lydia Kane could have been unconscious instantly. The skull injury was sufficient to cause death within minutes if untreated. He moved to the next slide, showing rib bones. Besides the skull injury, ribs 4 and 5 on the right show fractures from the same time, possibly from a hard fall or being pushed back during impact. No defensive wounds, meaning Lydia didn't resist. Rivera noted quickly, attack by surprise, unprepared. The report's final section focused on the body's condition. Cement and desert sand traces in the bone cavities indicated the body was buried simultaneously with the tank ceiling within hours or a day after death. No signs of relocation or secondary burial. The forensic conclusion stated clearly, cause of death. Traumatic brain injury from direct force impact, manner homicide. After the presentation, Rivera and the technical team reconstructed the scene based on Harold's confession and physical evidence. In the simulation room, they recreated in 3D the Kane house garage in 1982. Low wooden table, concrete walls, door to the backyard. Based on the old house layout and confession, Harold stood near the door as Lydia tried to leave, they argued. As she turned to go, he grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Accidentally, or intentionally, swinging the hammer in his hand. The blow struck her temple, causing her to fall onto the concrete floor. Rivera recalled Harold's interrogation detail, "I just wanted to keep her. I didn't mean to." That statement now made more sense. He may have acted in anger, striking reflexively, but instead of seeking help, he chose to hide. Per the team's hypothesis, after Lydia died, Harold dragged her body to the backyard through the garage door. The rib fractures could have occurred when he lifted her from the hard floor. He placed the body near the old water tank, temporarily covering it with fabric or a blanket, then that night, or the next morning, began digging. The July 19th cement purchase receipt matched the time he completed the burial. Construction experts confirmed the material amount was enough to fill a 2-meter-deep pit. The scene images were compiled into a seamless simulation, 7:10 p.m. Neighbors saw Lydia get in the car, turn back, possibly arguing. 7:15 p.m. The garage incident. 8:00 p.m. Harold moved Lydia's car, drove to the Agua Fria channel, staged the scene. 10:00 p.m. Returned home. Began digging the tank. 4:00 a.m. Finished burying and pouring cement. 6:30 a.m. The next day, Harold appeared at the nearby gas station, asking acquaintances if they saw Lydia last night, starting the missing daughter act. When the simulation ended, the room was silent. The final image froze on the backyard scene, fresh wet cement and summer dawn light shining on the ground, exactly like the real scene. Rivera saw 30 years later. The prosecutor asked, "What do you think the motive was?" Rivera replied briefly, "Control." Lydia wanted to leave, and Harold couldn't bear losing her. He'd lost his wife to illness. Lydia was his only family. When she resisted, he reacted in anger, then chose to hide instead of admitting fault. Experts added data analysis. No prior abuse evidence, but Harold was noted as authoritarian, tightly controlling Lydia after her mother's death. An old friend of Lydia's, re-interviewed, said, "She once said she couldn't stand her dad always making her come home on time, not going far, and once joked he'd lock me up if I left." Those words now sounded like a premonition. In June 2012, nearly 4 months after excavating Lydia Kane's remains, the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office finalized the indictment charging Harold Richard Kane with first-degree murder. The indictment, over 70 pages, compiled the entire evidence chain, forensic results, DNA, interrogation confessions, scene evidence, and Harold's actions from the summer of 1982. In the second-floor meeting room of the prosecutor's building, investigators, forensic experts, and Chief Prosecutor James Renard sat around the table. He tapped his finger lightly on the thick file before him. "We have everything: Harold's DNA traces on the bandana, the hammer matching the wound, the body buried right at his house. "This is the strongest cold case Phoenix has ever reopened." Rivera, sitting at the table's head, only nodded. She didn't want to add more. After over a year reviewing every detail, she knew even a small gap could be seized by the defense. Renard continued, "I want everything formalized per current procedures. All 1982 evidence must prove continuous chain of custody." The forensics team had done that. They detailed the preservation process of evidence box 82, PHX 3177, over 30 years. From the old storage room to the new cold case vault, sealing, inventory, and official reopening. All DNA samples were processed under current standards. Every step, every signature was verified. The prosecution also had an ace. The 2012 interrogation video of Harold, where he admitted, "I buried Lydia with my own hands." Though he called it an accident, those words were enough to prove intentional concealment and evidence tampering, elements constituting the charge. When the indictment was filed with the county court, the media erupted again. The press called it the trial of 3 decades. Some papers republished Lydia's photo next to Harold's in an orange prison jumpsuit. That image left the Phoenix community both horrified and sympathetic. An elderly father, quietly bowing his head, now a symbol of a crime exposed by time. However, the defense didn't stay silent. Harold's lawyer, former prosecutor Martin Feld, argued the physical evidence was too old to be reliable. He told the press, "DNA evidence cannot rule out contamination during 30 years of storage. My client's statement isn't a confession, but a narrative in a distressed mental state." In pretrial hearings, Feld tried to suppress the interrogation video, claiming Rivera led the suspect, inducing a guilty narrative. But the prosecution countered strongly. They presented the full audio recording, showing Harold was read his Miranda rights, had a lawyer present, and his statement was entirely voluntary. The legal battle began before the trial even opened. Feld requested retesting the DNA sample, arguing a dried blood stain can't prove murder. Rivera and forensic experts responded with a tight chain of reasoning. Harold's blood in Lydia's car could only be there if he directly interacted with the car's interior, which he always denied. The F-150 taillight piece matched his vehicle, and the rusted hammer found in the water tank had Lydia's blood, all undeniably linked. While the prosecution prepared evidence, Rivera continued working quietly. She reviewed every detail: cement purchase timing, delivery receipts, water tank sealing documents, even Harold's home repair application after the disappearance. Each document was copied, marked, and prepared for court. For her, this case was no longer just work, but a promise to Lydia to bring the truth to its final place. In August, the county court set the trial date, December 17, 2012. The venue was the large courtroom in central Phoenix, expected to last 3 weeks. The witness list included over 20 people, forensic experts, Harold's old neighbors, the new Peoria homeowners, and Rivera, summoned as the primary investigative witness. When this was announced, the Phoenix community buzzed again. Local TV channels launched a dedicated segment called The Kane Trial. Outside the courthouse, those who searched for Lydia years ago set up a small memorial board with the words, "We never stopped looking." Harold, held awaiting trial at Maricopa County Jail, declined interviews. Old acquaintances in Prescott Valley said he became quieter, reading the Bible daily. But prosecutors knew his calm demeanor wouldn't help much when facing scene photos, DNA samples, and his own words echoing in the courtroom. The night before submitting the official indictment, Rivera stayed alone in the office. She reviewed all documents, from the first photo of the Ford Fairmont by the Agua Fria Channel to the image of the broken water tank 30 years later. All were connected into a complete story, one that time couldn't conceal. In June 2012, nearly 4 months after excavating Lydia Kane's remains, the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office finalized the indictment charging Harold Richard Kane with first-degree murder. The indictment, over 70 pages, compiled the entire evidence chain: forensic results, DNA, interrogation confessions, scene evidence, and Harold's actions from the summer of 1982. In the second-floor meeting room of the prosecutor's building, investigators, forensic experts, and Chief Prosecutor James Renard sat around the table. He tapped his finger lightly on the thick file before him. "We have everything: Harold's DNA traces on the bandana, the hammer matching the wound, the body buried right at his house. This is the strongest cold case Phoenix has ever reopened." Rivera, sitting at the head of the table, only nodded. She didn't want to add more. After over a year of scrutinizing every detail, she knew even a small gap could be seized by the defense. Renard continued, "I want everything formalized per current procedures. All 1982 evidence must prove continuous chain of custody." The forensics team had done that. They detailed the preservation process of evidence box 82 PHX 3177 over 30 years, from the old storage room to the new cold case vault, sealing, inventory, and official reopening. All DNA samples were processed under current standards. Every step, every signature was verified. The prosecution also had an ace: the 2012 interrogation video of Harold, where he admitted, "I buried Lydia with my own hands." Though he called it an accident, those words were enough to prove intentional concealment and evidence tampering, elements constituting the charge. When the indictment was filed with the county court, the media erupted again. The press called it the trial of 3 decades. Some papers republished Lydia's photo next to Harold's in an orange prison jumpsuit. That image left the Phoenix community both horrified and sympathetic. An elderly father, quietly bowing his head, now a symbol of a crime exposed by time. However, the defense didn't stay silent. Harold's lawyer, former prosecutor Martin Feld, argued the physical evidence was too old to be reliable. In pretrial hearings, Feld tried to suppress the interrogation video, claiming Rivera led the suspect, inducing a guilty narrative. But the prosecution countered strongly. They presented the full audio recording, showing Harold was read his Miranda rights, had a lawyer present, and his statement was entirely voluntary. The legal battle began before the trial even opened. Feld requested retesting the DNA sample, arguing, "A dried bloodstain can't prove murder." Rivera and forensic experts responded with a tight chain of reasoning. Harold's blood in Lydia's car could only be there if he directly interacted with the car's interior, which he always denied. The F-150 taillight piece matched his vehicle, and the rusted hammer found in the water tank had Lydia's blood, all undeniably linked. While the prosecution prepared evidence, Rivera continued working quietly. She reviewed every detail: cement purchase timing, delivery receipts, water tank sealing documents, even Harold's home repair application after the disappearance. Each document was copied, marked, and prepared for court. For her, this case was no longer just work, but a promise to Lydia to bring the truth to its final place. In August, the county court set the trial date, December 17, 2012. The venue was the large courtroom in central Phoenix, expected to last 3 weeks. The witness list included over 20 people: forensic experts, Harold's old neighbors, the new Peoria homeowners, and Rivera, summoned as the primary investigative witness. When this was announced, the Phoenix community buzzed again. Local TV channels launched a dedicated segment called The Kane Trial. Outside the courthouse, those who searched for Lydia years ago set up a small memorial board with the words, "We never stopped looking." Harold, held awaiting trial at Maricopa County Jail, declined interviews. Old acquaintances in Prescott Valley said he became quieter, reading the Bible daily. But prosecutors knew his calm demeanor wouldn't help much when facing scene photos, DNA samples, and his own words echoing in the courtroom. The night before submitting the official indictment, Rivera stayed alone in the office. She reviewed all documents, from the first photo of the Ford Fairmont by the Agua Fria Channel to the image of the broken water tank 30 years later. All were connected into a complete story, one that time couldn't conceal. On the morning of December 17, 2012, the Maricopa County Courthouse was packed. Press, television, and Phoenix residents who followed Lydia Kane's disappearance 30 years ago, were all present. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy, as if everyone was witnessing a piece of the past pulled back into the light. In the front row, investigator Carla Rivera sat silently, with an enlarged photo of Lydia placed beside the prosecutor. Harold Richard Kane was led into the courtroom in an orange prison jumpsuit, gaunt, white-haired, walking slowly. As he sat in the defendant's chair, the room fell silent. The jury of 12, carefully selected, mostly Phoenix residents, listened as Judge Helen Parker read the indictment. Mr. Harold Richard Kane, charged with first-degree murder, intentionally causing the death of Lydia Kane on July 16, 1982. Camera shutters clicked, then hushed as Chief Prosecutor James Renard stepped up. He began with a firm, cold voice. 30 years ago, Phoenix saw a 19-year-old girl vanish without a trace. She didn't run away, wasn't kidnapped. She was killed by her own father. Renard presented the evidence chain scene photos of the Ford Fairmont, gas receipt, blood-stained bandana, taillight piece, rusted hammer, and the evidence box preserved for 3 decades. Each item was displayed, the spotlight making the room dead silent. When he held up the silver ring engraved with LK, many lowered their heads. The defendant's DNA was in Lydia's car, Renard said, pointing to a gene chart on the screen. The blood on the bandana is his. The skull fracture on the victim matches the hammer found in the water tank he cemented over. And he himself confessed, "I buried her with my own hands." In the jury box, some took notes. Others looked down, unable to hide their shock. Defense attorney Martin Feld stood to object. That statement was taken after over 10 hours of continuous interrogation. "My client is a man nearly 70, mentally unstable, under psychological pressure. He didn't confess, but recounted a vague memory of an accident." He turned to the jury, speaking slowly. "Look at him. This isn't a cold-blooded killer. This is a father who's endured loss for 30 years. No witnesses, no video, no evidence shows he intentionally killed his daughter. DNA? Possible contamination. The hammer. Maybe he dropped it during home repairs. 30 years is long enough for everything to be distorted." Over the next 2 days, the court heard witness testimonies. Old neighbors confirmed the argument the night Lydia disappeared. The building supply store owner confirmed selling cement to Harold, and forensic experts presented the full analysis results. Rivera was also called to the witness stand. She recounted reopening the case, the dust-covered evidence box from 30 years ago, the matching DNA, and the interrogation confession. "No accident leads to burying a body and staging a scene," she said, voice calm. "That was a choice, a deliberate choice." The defense tried to exploit a weakness. "Miss Rivera, are you sure that evidence box wasn't tampered with over 30 years?" She replied briefly, "I'm not sure about the past, but I know for certain that the blood on that bandana never lied." By the 10th day, the trial reached closing arguments. Renard ended his speech with a line that silenced the room. "Lydia was silent for 30 years under that cement. But through evidence, science, and this father's guilty hands, she's been heard again. No one has the right to bury the truth, not even their own flesh and blood." Feld responded emotionally. "No one can live a lifetime with guilt if they truly killed. Harold Kane didn't flee, didn't leave the state, he just grew old quietly. Jurors, consider, this may be a tragic accident, not intentional murder." Finally, the jury retired to deliberate. 1 hour passed, 2. By late afternoon, they returned with a folded paper. The jury foreperson read slowly, "On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty." In the courtroom, many sighed. Some shed tears. Harold slumped forward, eyes closed tightly. Rivera sat still, showing no emotion, only nodding slightly. Judge Helen Parker read the sentence. "Harold Richard Kane, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The court notes your actions not only took your daughter's life, but forced a community to live 30 years in deception. Justice may come late, but it comes." After the judge's gavel struck, Murmurs erupted. Rivera stepped into the hallway, where Phoenix's afternoon light shone golden through the glass. She saw reporters interviewing residents, all saying the same thing. Finally, Lydia has justice. At the hallway's end, as Harold was led away, he glanced back at the courtroom, eyes cloudy, no longer defiant, just an exhausted old man. Rivera looked back, saying nothing. The trial closed. The case file, State of Arizona v. Harold R. Kane, was sealed and archived. But for those who followed the journey, it was more than a verdict. It was the end of a summer buried under desert cement, and proof that no matter how long, justice finds its way back. News of Harold Richard Kane's sentencing spread across Phoenix hours after the judge's ruling. On evening broadcasts, images of the silver-haired man, handcuffed and led from court, appeared with the caption, 30 years after disappearance. Father convicted of killing daughter. The city seemed to pause. For Phoenix residents from the early 1980s, Lydia Kane's name wasn't unfamiliar. They'd seen missing person flyers plastered across gas stations, heard of the girl who vanished mysteriously on her way to work. No one imagined Lydia's body lay beneath the foundation of the home where she grew up, buried by her own father. At the old neighborhood on North 43rd Avenue, where the Kane family once lived, reporters captured neighbors standing silently before cameras. Evelyn McCallan, who saw Lydia leave that night, choked up. I always thought she was kidnapped. If I'd known the truth was this, I probably couldn't sleep. A group of residents held a small memorial. They placed wild flowers by the fence where the Ford Fairmont once parked, lighting candles under Lydia's photo with her gentle smile. She deserves to be remembered as a person, not a case, a young woman said. In investigative circles, the Lydia Kane case quickly became a national discussion. The Arizona Republic wrote, without the meticulous preservation of evidence, Box 82 PHX 3177, and without modern DNA technology, this truth would have remained under cement forever. KPNX 12 News aired a special report titled Justice Beneath the Cement. The opening showed Arizona's blazing desert, wind blowing through cacti, then the anchor's voice. 30 years of silence, broken by a single dried bloodstain. The Arizona State Forensic Lab later held a symposium on long-term evidence preservation, using Lydia's case as an example. Rivera was invited to speak, but kept it brief. No case is truly cold. It just waits for someone patient enough to listen. Officers who investigated in 1982 watched the outcome on TV. Retired Lieutenant Daniel Morgan, now over 70, said in an interview, "Back then, we had nothing but hunches." I still remember his eyes, calm to the point of being terrifying. The Phoenix community saw the case as a reminder that crime can be hidden by time, but justice never vanishes. In Prescott Valley, where Harold lived for years, former neighbors admitted feeling betrayed. One said, "He helped me fix my fence," talked about his lost daughter. No one suspected he buried her. On social media, younger people, born after the case, shared Rivera's story with comments, "Time can erase traces, but not the truth." Some 1982 search volunteers posted old photos, captioned, 30 years later, we finally found Lydia. Amid the news wave, Rivera avoided interviews. She appeared only once, at Lydia's memorial at Greenwood Cemetery. Beside the new headstone, inscribed Lydia Kane, 1963-1982. Finally, you are home. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers, gazed long, then left. That night, KPNX's final broadcast ended with a desert sunset and the anchor's voice, soft as a farewell. Phoenix will remember Lydia Kane as a symbol of delayed justice and proof that silence, no matter how long, will one day be broken. 30 years after that girl vanished, the city remained vibrant, its roads bathed in sunlight. But for many Phoenix residents, passing the old house on North 43rd Avenue, they remembered some stories seem buried forever until the truth rises from cement and time's dust. Lydia Kane's story mirrors a quiet obsession in modern American society, where domestic violence and control in close relationships can lurk behind seemingly peaceful doors, heralds control over Lydia's hours, friends, and orders not to go far, were warning signs the community overlooked then. Today, in an America facing thousands of missing persons cases yearly, we must learn to recognize those signs earlier. If you hear someone say, "My partner won't let me go out," or "My dad needs to know where I am," every hour, pay attention, ask, and if needed, report to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. Lydia's story also highlights the value of science and persistence. Only through preserved evidence and DNA technology was the truth found after 30 years. In a country that values justice, we must not only trust the legal system, but also protect the truth with the smallest actions. Care, remember, and don't stay silent against injustice. If you believe justice, even delayed, deserves to be heard. Subscribe to our channel to explore more cases forgotten by time. Thank you for following Lydia Kane's journey to reclaim the truth. See you in the next video, where another American story will be brought to light.